You're listening to Wine Blast with me, Susie Barry, and my husband and fellow Master of Wine, Peter Richards, and you are most welcome. In this episode, we are taking one particularly intriguing case study as a way of focusing on a vital and fascinating topic, which is no less than the future of wine, and by extension, the future of our planet and our species.
When you put it like that, you know, even
big stuff.
Even I've sat up to attention. But yeah, we're talking sustainability. I hesitate to use that term because I'm aware it tends to inspire everything from yawns to lethargy to eye rolling, even sort of existential despair. But you're right, you know, what we're really talking about is the way in which the world of wine is changing, particularly the way the wine is sold, which is ultimately at the heart of things, because there'd be very little wine if it didn't sort of generate an income for its producers.
And I think that's true. And I think it's sometimes tempting to think sustainability is a bit dull or depressing, partly because we're so often presented with the gloomy side of it, or the omens of doom. But we want, don't we, to flip this around and focus on a more positive example, which is a UK wine retailer going out on a limb, aiming to be carbon neutral by 2024, to have zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2028, and to be net zero across the entire business and supply chain by 2040. This retailer wants, and I quote, to be the most sustainable, ethical and responsible wine retailer in the world. So big aims, I would say.
Big aims, aren't they? And they belong to the Wine Society. We got wind of these plans, which are quite recent, aren't they? And so I went over to visit them at their HQ in Stevenage. And this was what CEO Steve Finland said over lunch.
Without getting into the debate about whether or not climate change will reverse itself at some point in the future, or whether or not actually, you know, it's all bunkum in terms of the science on it, the reality is we sell wine and wine is changing. It really is as simple as that, and therefore we've got to adapt as well as vineyards. So I think it's so incredibly important that we talk about it.
Nice to hear you had a good lunch. Never knowingly under-lunched, are you? Some nice wines too.
Yeah, the odd bottle may have been sampled. That's all I can say at this stage.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll be hearing more on that shortly. Yep. A true professional that you are.
It's all work. When will you believe me when I say this?
All in the cause. Yeah. But no, I mean, I think we think this move by the Wine Society is incredibly important, don't we? And we're fascinated by how on earth they're going to manage it, given wine is not the most eco-friendly sector, is it? Yes, it's a natural product, but it takes a lot of intervention to produce the grapes and then to make the wine. And more importantly, it's then a heavy, bulky product to lug around the world, often with a fair bit of packaging to get rid of once it's drunk. I mean, we've actually had wine described on this show as, and I quote, the villain in the climate story, haven't we?
We have. That brings back memories, didn't we? That was from Series 3, Episode 6, I think, wasn't it? Wine's alt format warriors battle climate change.
What a title. Snappy title, that wasn't it?
Snappier titles. I had to say the remark didn't go unchallenged as a contention, but it really was an eye-opening moment, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Rob Malin, I think, from Wine in Rome. And then to weigh that against the Wine Society's very ambitious aims, it's all most intriguing. You know, where's the truth? Where's the balance in all of this? And, you know, there are obvious questions that come up. You know, can it really be done? If so, how can it be done? And what does the future of wine retail look like? And of course, at the same time, it's so important to be aware of greenwashing, where businesses use these green issues to sort of boost their image, when in reality those businesses are still having a significantly can't speak today, can I? Significantly negative impact on the planet. You know, offsetting comes in for a lot of flack here, doesn't it? Yeah, it does.
Which is when you pay for example, to have trees planted to offset your environmental impact. But Greenpeace describes offsetting as just PR guff to appeal to environmentally aware consumers. And when actually what businesses should be doing, of course, is actively reducing their own environmental impact.
Yeah. I mean, this is all really important stuff for us wine lovers, isn't it? Because ultimately none of us will be able to buy our favourite wines if we don't get this kind of thing sorted. And of course, all of what we were discussing, what you've just mentioned about greenwashing, made my trip to the Wine Society that much more intriguing, kind of to poke around behind the scenes, sort of to get to grips with what they're trying to do.
Ask the right questions.
Yeah, exactly. All the whys and the hows. So I guess we probably should give a bit of background to the Wine Society itself, shouldn't we? Because it's a bit unusual as a wine retailer. How to describe it? It's effectively a big wine club, isn't it, really? You pay to be a member.
So, yeah. You pay to be a member,
It's not much. It's about 40 quid, isn't it? But you get £20 off your first order. So effectively it's about 20 quid. And that's you in for life as a shareholder.
Absolutely. And I think it started off as, I think I'm right in this, that as a way of getting rid of leftover wine after a big wine show, didn't it?
That's exactly right. Exactly right. There's a noble origin story if ever there was one, wasn't there? Getting rid of leftover wine. We've all been there. Let's make a business out of it. No, so this was back in 1874. There'd been some sort of international exhibitions, but a whole load of Portuguese wine, of all things, had been forgotten about and was left over in the cellars of the Royal Albert Hall.
Didn't know the Royal Albert Hall had cellars.
Random
How
things.
exciting.
There we go.
That would be a good trip, wouldn't
international exhibitions of wine at the Royal Albert Hall? I'd be there in a shot. The growers, apparently, the Portuguese growers were very upset that their wines hadn't been tasted, understandably. So to avert a diplomatic incident, a way had to be found to get these wines drunk. And this initiative ended up evolving into the Wine Society.
Fast forward 150 odd years and slightly different picture
it's
today.
Now, exactly, and I quote, the world's oldest member-owned community of wine lovers is how they describe themselves. So it's intriguing in itself. It used to be mail order, but now it's largely an online retailer. Though, of course, they do have a shop at their HQ in Stevenage, which we both visited, haven't we? We both patronised. And it's pretty sizable in terms of business. Turnover
the company as a whole.
Of the whole Wine Society, turnover of 160 million, around active membership of 180,000. Apparently they sell 3,600 different wines from 27 countries.
But that slightly unusual ownership structure is quite important, is it, in terms of what we're talking about here? Yeah,
absolutely. So this is not a company whose primary purpose is to generate profit or serve external shareholders. It exists for the benefit of its members. Of course, it has to wash its face, pay its staff and costs, and be, sustainable financially. But its structure means profits can go back into the business, and they can help, for example, keep prices low if that's what they want to do. And frankly, they often are quite well priced, their wines, aren't they? They don't just have to focus on the bottom dollar, which also tends to mean there's a big emphasis on sort of quality and the diversity of the wines.
Absolutely. And it's worth noting on that note that their buying team is one of the most experienced and highly rated, I would say, in the business. And they claim more than 150 years of experience between them.
Is that right? We don't want to be ageist about this, do we?
Well, it's not being ageist. That's
just,
between them.
We won't go into individual cases then. But, they have got some younger buyers.
They've got some very young buyers,
which makes that figure all the more eye-opening, I suppose. If you compared that to other businesses, major wine businesses in the UK, especially supermarkets, it wouldn't be anywhere near that, would it? But anyway, I think, and you see that experience in their range, don't you? Their range is great. Their team, the value, the service is generally pretty highly rated in UK wine.
It's very highly rated.
The Wine Society generally tends to win strings of awards, doesn't it, in all the wine retailer competitions in this country, including the Decanter Retailer Awards, which I chair. But it's not just that; it's all across the board.
But and in terms of sustainability, this membership structure means it answers to its members, who are also, as you say, shareholders, and they are presumably, as wine lovers, keen to see the Wine Society become more sustainable.
Absolutely. Sorry, yes, this is what you were asking about earlier, wasn't it? I didn't answer you directly. They say that they're aiming to be, and I quote, the go-to retailer for wine that is better quality, better value, and better for the planet. Now, I have to say, I'm not a big fan of the hanging comparatives there. Classic ad speak.
That's what you call them.
Whiter than what? But anyway, you get the general impression. And they're saying that their ownership structure is what enables them to get ahead of the game in that sense. What they're also saying is that the fact they're a wine business, ultimately founded or sort of rooted, if you like, in the agricultural sector, also gives them great advantages in this sense, being more sustainable.
Okay, so intriguing. It sounds, intriguing. It does sound like you actually did manage to find some time outside of lunch, of course, to do some interviewing and recording and asking the questions. So I would say, why don't you set the scene for us?
Okay, all right, sure, good idea. So the Wine Society's HQ in Stevenage is, I think they'll forgive me for saying, it's not the most glamorous location in the world.
I agree, it's not.
I almost see the opening scenes from The Office, but I'm not sure if that's fair on either of them.
Well, I'd probably take that.
I'll paint the picture. It's pretty industrial. You know, it's warehouses, offices, lorries, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's also a bit of a building site. Certainly was when I visited. They were finishing construction of Warehouse 5, which will mean they have a capacity for a whopping 11.5 million bottles by the time they finish that.
So anyway, so relatively industrial, or at least very functional.
Yeah, which is fair
good.
enough. It's fair enough, given...
Yeah.
You know, they need to be. They've got lots of wine coming in. They've got lots of wine going out.
Yeah. They need to be efficient.
And when you go inside, it is eye-opening. You know, it's wine stacked up right to the ceiling. So when I say ceilings, we're talking, 17 metres high, eight pallets high. You've got these amazing super modern forklifts which whiz around and then zoom up into the kind of clouds.
No, they didn't get you one of those, did they? Because
I did ask.
I know your
I was
your
denied.
love of heights.
I kind of
Being
asked
a tall man.
just because I felt I had to ask to be macho, and then I was incredibly glad when they said you're not allowed.
No.
If they'd said yes, I would have said, oh no, I wasn't expecting to say. Anyway, it is, you need specialists working these things, and they go up. And imagine, being 70 metres up, and then you put your thing in, and then you hoik out an entire pallet of wine and move it somewhere. I mean, it's just, I'd be absolutely terrified.
You would.
That's one of, you'd be deep sea diver in the Arctic would be your idea of the worst.
Well, anything really
job
cold
imaginable.
is the worst job.
For me, I think
heights.
Vertiginous forklift driver.
I would say, or maybe window cleaning a skyscraper.
Yeah. But anyway, the other thing that springs to mind, though, the more heartening thing for me walking around was, you go into the warehouses, particularly Warehouse 1, which is their oldest one, which I think was built in 1965 or somewhere around then. That's where they keep their members' private reserves. So you can buy wine through them on Primeur and store it there as private reserves. Or
right. So like a
a
warehouse for your members.
But it's just for wines that their wine members have bought and want to store.
Okay.
It's just like being a kid in a sweetie shop. It's absolutely amazing. You've got the most famous, most delicious names. First Growth Bordeaux. You've got Dominus. You've got Ridge.
So this is interesting that I think maybe people are not necessarily aware that is something you could buy through the Wine Society as well.
Yeah, you can do. And anyway. then you've got their museum bin. Where they keep sort of very special older vintages to serve to sort of VIPs, particularly visiting growers. So the day I visited, they had a Chardonnay specialist from New Zealand, one of the top producers in Chardonnay in New Zealand, visiting, and so they were serving him white Burgundy to make that comparison with what he does with.
So in a way, they're sort of helping educate the wine producers around the world, aren't they? I mean, quite because quite often it's really difficult to try the classics or wines from elsewhere if you're a grower in, I don't know, say Chile or wherever. Yeah. So it's a really helpful, constructive thing to do, isn't it?
It really is, actually. It's sort of underrated, but I did ask about this, and they said to them that relationships matter, and that their mission is to, and I do like this, to champion the joy of good wine. Of course, this could be PR speak, this is marketing, but at the same time, actually, I think the fact they serve these lovely wines, they make the effort to keep these wines and serve them.
I was going to say, the Wine Society own these wines.
Yeah,
they're not their members' wines. They're not wines
pinching
to sell.
Their members' wines. They own them. They buy them and lay them down specifically for this purpose. And a lot of it is to share with growers.
Yeah,
and actually, that's it's almost certainly helping improve wine standards, wine quality around the world.
Yeah.
Because, these guys don't often get to try these things. And so to be able to do that, to compare them, they might get back with a few new ideas, and I suppose it also probably explains why the Wine Society's producers are so loyal to them. Every time you come in, you get some lovely wine.
Yeah. A drop of white Burgundy can work wonders, can't it? It certainly does with me. Anyway.
I'll remember that.
Moving on. You got to quiz a couple of the key members of the Wine Society team, didn't you? Tell us about that.
Outside of lunch, I sat down with Dom Deville, who is the Wine Society's newly appointed Director of Sustainability and Social Impact, as well as Director of Wine Pierre Mansour, who's been on the pod before, as you'll remember. Now, I had lots of questions for both of them, but I started by grilling Dom whose background is in sustainability rather than wine. So he's a specialist in the field.
And on that note, we did want to clarify one of the terms Dom uses before we start, didn't we?
Yeah, that's right. We discussed this, didn't we? We touch on right weighting without much context in the interview. This is about reducing the weight of glass bottles so less carbon is emitted in transport. It's kind of a successor to the concept of light weighting. It's still about reducing weight, but in a sort of more measured, appropriate way for the wine and its safety in transport and consumption. Anyway, I started by asking Dom DeVille where this ambitious sustainability drive was coming from and how on earth they aim to achieve it.
I think a lot of the drive has come from individuals in the business, but also a lot from our growers. We work in the agricultural space. Our growers are already experiencing climate change and have done for 20 years in some cases. They see firsthand the problems of climate change in extreme weather fluctuations, drought, flooding, loss of biodiversity, and they're experiencing it every day, and so we know it's there, and we know we've got to tackle it. The UK government have said that all businesses by 2050 have to be net zero. We have said 2040 because in the agricultural sector we can and are expected to move faster than, say, the airline sector or the construction sector.
I'm very interested to hear that, you're having feedback from your growers saying, look, this is an issue for us. How are we going to get ahead of the curve here?
Yeah, exactly. And so, in terms of how we do it, we've got to take it in a step-by-step process.
Yeah, so talk us through it then.
Step one, we need data. We need to know where are our emissions coming from. So not only in our own business, but right the way through the supply chain. So how many emissions are coming from our shipping? How much is coming from the winery? How much is coming from the grape growing? How much is coming from the packaging? How much is coming from the last mile delivery? Those figures have now come out, so we have a sense of that.
Can you give us a brief sense of those pictures?
I can, yes,
That's
but
really
I want to caveat it by saying these are not the final verified numbers.
Sure.
These are our initial numbers. But about 94% of our emissions comes from our supply chain, which is not really surprising. And that's broken down into about 55% of that is from the wine making and the wine packaging. At 18 to 20% is the logistics. So that's the shipping to our warehouses here in Stevenage, and then the onward distribution to members' homes. And then about 13% is for the goods and services not for resale, so the other stuff that we buy. So, our gardening services or our marketing materials or our IT equipment and IT services, for example.
If you could put your finger on one specific element within that bigger picture of where you think, is the biggest issue and the fundamental chunk that you could work on to reduce, what would that one thing be?
The big one's packaging.
Packaging.
That we can tackle here now today.
What is specifically glass bottles packaged at source and sent overseas? Is that what it is? Yeah,
so glass accounts for around about 30%.
Wow. So that's massive.
Ish. So it's a big number. And it's a number that we know we can tackle. And so, we have to tackle it in a number of ways. One is right weighting. And I use right weighting deliberately because you can only lightweight so far before the glass becomes unstable and breaks. And you don't want that happening because the product, the wine, it has much more carbon in it than the packaging in general. So you're wasting wine. Yeah. So right weighting, alternative packaging formats, which we are moving into, and then the shipping, obviously.
Obviously, I think that it comes as no surprise that packaging is one of the key issues to address. That's been discussed, in wine circles for a while now. It's just a question of how well to do that, and also bearing in mind that things like plastics, even if they are designed to be recycled, can end up being single-use plastics. And of course, plastic pollution, while it doesn't maybe come into a carbon footprint audit, is another big issue facing the planet.
Plastic is an interesting one. It's been demonised in the press, but it's been demonised because of what we do with it, not so much because of what it is and what it's made from.
Yeah.
Actually, plastic in the right application is the right material, and actually is very good. It can be recycled many times if you chemically recycle it. I think it's more or less infinite. It's quite low carbon. If you think about bag in box, for example, versus glass, the bag in box is about 70 grams of carbon, and a glass bottle is about, a heavy glass bottle is about 500 or 600 grams of carbon.
Where would a normal wine bottle come in at?
So a normal wine bottle that's around 450 grams would be somewhere around 500 grams of carbon. Those aren't precise numbers, but something around there. So plastic is a good material in the right application. What we need to be doing is actually recycling it. The UK needs to be sorting out its infrastructure to recycle it better. And we need to not be sending it abroad into countries where it gets put into the sea.
Yeah, and this is the thing. To do that, you need an engaged consumer base, don't you? So, for example, you would want, if you're switching to plastics, I imagine you would want to encourage your members to be able to properly recycle products of yours that were plastic. I mean, to what extent do you get a sense that your membership, your customers are engaged with this initiative of yours? What sense do you get from them for this big, ambitious project that you're putting in place? Are they buying into it? Because presumably you need them to do that in order for this to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. We can't do this without the support of our members. We need to engage them in things like our packaging trials, because to be successful, we need them to be doing the things that need to happen. So we are looking at the moment, launching a packaging trial for bag-in-box and for the plastic PET bottles, expanding our cans range, so having a bit more of an alternative packaging portfolio in the spring. We've gone for bag-in-box because the carbon savings, the water savings, the resource savings are quite high there. The problem, of course, with it is the bag is not recyclable at curbside. It needs to be sent to a specialist recycler. So nothing is perfect there. The plastic PET bottle is fully recyclable and has a much lower carbon footprint than an equivalent glass bottle. But there's some work to do, I think, to get people to engage again with plastics, because, again, it's been demonized. So it is made from 100% recycled content. It can be recycled over and over again. But I think there's a mindset change that we kind of have to overcome, and we need to work with our members on that.
That sounds quite serious, because, if you've got to effect a mindset change, that's a big thing to achieve, changing people's minds on this kind of subject, which it can be quite personal as well. People can have quite this, wine is something that is fun, and people they don't want to worry about, they don't want to stress about. So, I mean, presumably that's something that you've got to work towards. That's part of your plan to change people's minds on this. Yeah,
I think to be successful in sustainability, we need to do three things. One, we need to educate and build awareness on the issues, so that people kind of engage in these topics. Why are we doing this? What are the benefits? What are the issues here? So just building that awareness. And if you think about what's happened in this country over the last 5 years, people are talking about sustainability more and more. They're talking about people during the pandemic. They're talking about climate change. You're talking about plastic recycling. So that is happening. We need to encourage that. The second thing is we need to make doing the right thing easy, because people want to buy sustainably. They want to be sustainable. But actually, when it comes down to it, they don't really want to go the extra mile to doing it. So we need to make it easy for them. So we need to work with our growers and producers on sustainability of the wine, of the packaging. We need to do our job as the Wine Society on getting our own house in order here in Stevenage, reducing our emissions, working on waste here, so that when we put wine on the shelves, it's as sustainable as it can be across the board. And so it's easy for members to buy sustainably. And I think sustainability certifications have a role in that as well as markers. And then the third thing is legislation, I think, which can really help. Businesses like nothing more than a level playing field where the rules of the game are set. And if the government comes up with sensible legislation around, for example, tax incentives for lower carbon packaging, carbon tax has been mooted. I know there are issues around that, but that is something to look at. But I think legislation needs to play a role in it. And at the moment, the only real legislation we've got is the government saying that by 2050, the country is committed to being carbon net zero.
So what would you call for? What would you right now? Would you call for a carbon tax, or would you go for tax incentives? And if you went for tax incentives, what would they be?
Yeah, so I think there are some things that are already happening. So we've got extended producer responsibility coming out on packaging in 2024. So what this is aiming to do is to, at the moment, taxpayers cover the cost of recycling at curbside. It comes out of our monthly tax bill from our local council. The government is saying, actually, no, businesses produce that packaging. They should pay for the recovery and the recycling of it. So this is what extended producer responsibility is. It's kind of the producer pays principle. So you produce it, you pay to clear it up. That's coming in 2024, and that is going to massively increase the costs of compliance fees that businesses like the Wine Society, all retailers, all brands have to pay. And it's going to increase it by 5, 6, 7 times. We don't know. But it's going to make packaging going from being just the cost of doing business to actually a major cost centre. So that's going to encourage us all to reduce our packaging because it's done by weight.
Cost comes into everything. You're being very ambitious here. Do you have a figure for how much this this initiative is going to cost the society?
My view on this, and the view that we're taking here, is that sustainability done well should pay for itself over time. So yes, there will be some areas where we will need to invest upfront. So we are going from if we talk about solar panels, for example, at the moment we produce about 23% of our own electricity. Next year, that's going to go up to 55%. Well, that's the plan at the moment. That requires an upfront investment in solar panels. So there are things like that require upfront investment. Packaging, for example, the trials cost money to do. They should pay for themselves over the long run because not only is it an environmental benefit, but we will have to pay less as a business in packaging recovery notes, which is the government compliance schemes, for example. And then if you think about outside of the Wine Society and our own operations, and then you think about the growers and producers, for example, and the conversations we're having with them, well, again, in the long run, these more sustainable approaches should pay dividends. If you think about reducing water, finding ways to reduce water on site, again, moving into renewable energy, some of the farming practices that we talk about in sustainability that are more regenerative, are less interventionist, require less chemicals, less cost of inputs. You can become more resilient to the effects of of climate change through these practices. So this should pay off in the long run.
But whether or not it pays off in the long run, you know, you're still allocating a cost to it, aren't you? You're director of sustainability. What's your budget? What are you saying? This is what we need to invest in, let's say, the next 5, 10, you know, even before 2040.
Yeah, so I think we are thinking that we would invest somewhere around 500,000 a year in sustainability. So some of that would go into our own operations, but a big part of our approach is supporting and working with our growers and producers. So if we go back to this kind of idea of our plan is we need to reduce our carbon emissions, but the second two, we need to help our growers to adapt to climate change. And the third one is we need to do what we can to improve carbon sequestration in our supply chain. Those things are going to require investment. So to help growers adapt, we're saying that we want to set up a supplier forum, which will be a mechanism for our growers and producers to talk to each other, share information on the challenges they're facing around climate change, learn from each other. We've been talking about can we set up a similar system to the one that they have in Bordeaux, where we hire a consultant, climate change consultant for 20 growers, let's say, that goes around and helps advise, share lessons from others on how to adapt to some of the effects of climate change. Can we invest in research? And then when we're talking about the sequestration, we've talked about this idea of insetting that we want to start doing from 2024.
Yeah, this is very interesting. I wanted to ask you, because obviously we're very familiar with the concept of offsetting.
Yes.
Sometimes we've all had a flight and then we've offset it and felt better about ourselves. What's insetting?
Insetting is where you take your carbon emissions and rather than paying into offsetting schemes to offset your emissions as you're working to reduce them, you use that money and you invest it in your own supply chain in nature-based solutions that sequester carbon from the atmosphere.
I see. So you are, offsetting, insetting, you're doing the same sort of thing. You're trying to work to invest to balance the books, as it were, somehow.
Yes.
And you're looking to do that in the vineyards, is that right?
Yes. So the priority here is carbon reduction, is reducing your own emissions, right? So you've got to have a very strong plan in place to reduce your emissions. And that plan is what we're developing at the moment, and we will submit our reduction targets to the SBTI, which is a science-based targets initiative for sort of formal accreditation on that. So reduction is key. But as we are reducing, we will still be emitting carbon. So what can we do in the meantime to offset that? We can put a carbon price on our emissions. So let's say in our direct operations, we are emitting 2,000 tons of carbon per year. We pick a carbon price, let's say that's £40 per ton, which is higher than we would need to pay. We multiply that by 2,000. We come up with a pound figure, and we use that money and invest it in our vineyards, in our own supply chain. And that could be in cork forests, woodlands, wetlands, hedgerows. It could be about ways to change farming practices that sequester more carbon into the soil. The point being is you're trying to draw down your carbon from the atmosphere into nature. We've got this problem across the world that we are losing biodiversity at the rate of knots. You think about the Amazon rainforest, you think about, you drive your car through the countryside, you don't get bugs on the window anymore. So biodiversity is insects, bees, birds, hedgerows, trees, anything that's natural, this natural ecosystem, it's disappearing. And so those things are not drawing the atmosphere, the carbon out of the atmosphere anymore because they're not there. The soil health is degrading because we're using a lot of chemicals on it, and soil actually is a massive carbon sink, has the potential to be a massive carbon sink. So our idea through insetting is, can we play a small part in trying to reverse that, slow it down? And it is only a small part. So it's investing some of the funds that we have in projects that will improve soil health, improve biodiversity, whether that's hedgerows, woodlands, wetlands, birds, bees, whatever it might be, so you have a more healthy ecosystem that is increasing the sequestration levels of that vineyard.
Okay. And wine's a funny one, isn't it? Because you think of the idyllic image of the vineyard growing in the sun and you think, actually, that should be sequestering a lot of carbon and we should be doing the right thing there. But obviously then, as soon as you start fermenting, releasing CO2, it's then a heavy product to ship around the world and to distribute. So I have heard wine called the villain in the piece by Rob Balin, actually, on our programme when he was talking at COP26 alongside an oil industry magnate. What do you think about that?
I think all businesses are contributing to climate change. I don't know that wine is any more of a villain than anybody else. It's just a fact of life at the moment that if you run a business, you will be in some way contributing to climate change. The key thing is, are you doing something about it? Have you measured your emissions? Have you set reduction targets? Have you had them certified by an external body? Do you have a plan in place that is going to enable you to meet those targets? And I think if you're doing that, then you're on the right track.
Not many companies and not many wine companies have been and are being as ambitious as you are with this. I mean, are you seeing lots of other people in the wine world doing this kind of thing, doing what you're doing?
So outside of wine, I think there is a lot of talk about this from brands and retailers. I think the action is still catching up with the talk, if I may put it like that.
Well, that's a very diplomatic way of putting it. Do you think particularly in the wine industry, people need to do more?
And I think in the wine industry, what I personally have seen is that a lot of the growers are doing really good stuff. And that's where things are happening at the moment. And that's really, really encouraging to see. And I think that comes from the fact that growers are already experiencing climate change and they know they need to do something about it. But, we're seeing the likes of Camel Valley, for example, in Cornwall, who are already carbon negative in that they are sequestering more carbon than they are emitting. You've got the likes of Villera in South Africa, who are planting 100,000 trees to sequester carbon. So there's some really good stories of people out there who are doing things. And I think, going back to one of your original questions about, well, will everybody want to do this? Well, no. I mean, I'm sure not everybody will want to work on all of these things. I think we need to get the majority moving. And in a lot of vineyards, there are unproductive spaces that can be used for sequestration. I think it's about education, incentives, providing investment and help to do that. And
perhaps looking beyond sustainability slightly, yours is a newly created role, Director of Sustainability and Social Impact. You say you are aiming to be, the Wine Society is aiming to be the most sustainable and ethical wine retailer in the world. This goes beyond just sustainability, doesn't it? And how? Yeah,
this is a really bold ambition that we've set ourselves. It's a bold statement, isn't it? It's a really bold statement we've set ourselves. Sometimes I can't quite believe we managed to get everyone to sign up to it.
Are you feeling the pressure?
But this is a really, really important one. When you think about, we've said we are going to have the most in wine environmentally sustainable and ethical supply chain. So we always need to remember we need to talk about the ethical side of things as well, the people side of it. And that's something coming into wine that I have seen much less conversation about, actually, than I have done in other sectors. There are issues around people in wine, just as there are in all agricultural products, particularly around harvest time, migrant labour, working conditions, pay, exploitation, these kinds of things. So they need to be looked at and tackled as well. Wine has not had an expose or a scandal around these things yet, and I think it's only a matter of time. And so I think we need to, it's an area we really need to work on.
You're also developing a new diversity, equity, and inclusion policy. Wine historically has not been a very inclusive space. Tell us about that and the scale of the challenge there. Yeah,
again, big challenge. And this is something, and I probably say this too many times, that we need to work on ourselves here as the Wine Society, get our own house in order. And I keep saying that over and over again, but it's true. This is about bringing people from different backgrounds, different beliefs, different experiences into the world of wine. So that's working in the Wine Society, and it's working in vineyards and making wine. I think that wine traditionally is not particularly diverse, and I think there's a really important job to do to encourage people in. So we are setting up a mentoring scheme, which will bring people from lower socioeconomic status, disadvantaged people into our business each year. We're going to be offering training to those people as well. And then, of course, we're also looking at our recruitment, hiring practices, and how we ourselves become a more inclusive organisation to encourage people from different backgrounds to come into wine.
Dom, thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Wow, lots to ponder there. I mean, it does sound like a business contemplating some pretty big changes.
Yeah, on many fronts. But of course, first they have to quantify things before they can find out how to develop the plan. And some things can also make good business sense, irrespective of the sustainability angle. I think it's important to mention it. You know, he mentioned solar power, for example, which is going from supplying 23% to 55% of their electricity needs with the new solar array on top of the new warehouse. Yeah. Now, that new solar array is costing about £400,000, which is a big investment.
Yeah.
But Dom also mentioned that their current energy bills were potentially being hiked by 5 to 6 times at the moment. This is something people are seeing all over the UK, that they're going from around £180,000 to nearly £1 million. That's one hike this year. So, you know, that investment in renewables, which they control, actually makes sense from a purely financial perspective as well, especially right now.
Yeah. Immediately, you're going to be, making your money back, aren't you? I mean, gosh, it's been such a tough year for businesses, hasn't it? Just so many costs increasing. It
really has. You know, so Steve Finnan, the CEO, who we heard from earlier, described it as an unstoppable headwind this year against businesses. You know, he said their basic costs, which they've had to swallow, of course, have gone up about 4 to 5 million over the course of the year.
Between 4 and 5 million.
Yeah, that's just the rate. So dry goods like bottles are in very short supply. Apparently, I didn't know you knew this, but I didn't. One of the biggest glass suppliers is in the Ukraine.
Oh gosh.
I mean, they supply so many things, that country we never knew about, which we do obviously now. And the price of glass has gone up 30 to 40%, apparently. Dom also mentioned the new packaging recovery and recycling schemes in the interview, which are coming in, which is another cost for the business. But obviously, on top of that, you've got rampant inflation. I mean, so many of these things are.
So on the one hand, you might think it's the worst time to have to drive a sustainability agenda as well. Yeah. But it seems that this can actually benefit businesses as well as future-proofing them.
Exactly.
You've got good as well.
Yes. I think that's how some businesses are seeing it increasingly. And the Wine Society is a good example of that. It's not always easy, tends to be a series of trade-offs rather than easy wins. I remember Dom saying something along the lines of there's no right or wrong in sustainability. You just got slightly better and slightly worse, and you have to be really thoughtful about every action you're taking.
What about vans and delivery? I mean, that's often a very kind of visible form of impact, isn't it?
Yeah, we did touch on this. They've calculated that 20% of their carbon emissions are from logistics, of which 60% is accounted for by transport to their HQ in Stevenage, getting the wines, from around the world to their HQ in Stevenage. And then 40% is in deliveries from Stevenage to their customers.
40% for the last few miles. I mean, that sounds a lot. I mean, given they've got wine coming in, like you say, from all over the world, it's the bit from them to the customer.
Do you know what? I completely agree.
Crikey, yeah.
But from what I hear, that is actually often the case. These sort of last mile things do add up. So the Wine Society work with DHL, who are apparently making good progress on the sustainability front, but they're also planning to convert their own fleet of vans to electric by 2028. But of course, it's difficult with wine, which is heavy, and it may need delivering to remote or rural areas where there isn't much infrastructure for electric charging, for example.
But I suppose right weighting or light weighting or converting to bag in box or alternative packaging, that's definitely going to help with this, isn't it?
Yeah, I suppose it should, shouldn't it?
Well, it should certainly make it
slowly,
less heavy.
Yeah, I mean, it all. I suppose with these sort of things, you need lots of different things to change to make an overall bigger difference. I don't know, but I think we also need investment in better infrastructure. That's true, and that has to be a role for government to do that. But just to touch on weight and right weighting, one interesting thing that Dom mentioned as well was that the Wine Society are part of a sustainable wine roundtable and have funded research along with fellow retailers like Systembolaget, the Swedish alcohol monopoly, and Waitrose to come up with what are the ideal bottle weights for still and sparkling, and to see if retailers can align behind those weights and over time enforce them. Yeah. Interesting, isn't it?
Interesting, yeah. But I mean, good to hear people trying to force through change. Heavy bottles can be just so damaging to the environment. But it can be hard for producers to change. As we heard from Professor Charles Spence, people associate weight with quality when it comes to wine. And that's a hard association to break unless we have a concerted effort from everyone in a fairer, more level playing field.
No, that's true. It's interesting. You'd also hope on the flip side there'd be an extra incentive to buy wine if it is more sustainably packaged, and people can shout about that. And that yes, it runs counter to this sort of seemingly automatic association of weight with quality, but I wonder if those things might counterbalance.
They might.
But you're absolutely right to mention Charles Spence, and that episode was the magical science of taste, which was series 3, episode 15. Well worth a listen.
Now, you also talked to Pierre, didn't you?
Yeah, that's right. So Dom and I were joined by Pierre Mansour, the Wine Society's director of wine. So I wanted to ask him a bit more about the wine side of things, and I started by questioning him as to whether their buying strategy has changed because of their sustainability drive.
Hasn't changed, but what has changed is our buyers are now even more aware of the principles around sustainability. So our buyers get the opportunity to travel a lot. We think that is the best way to unlocking tasty wines and unlocking new and different, quite sort of progressive wines. So our buyers have been spending a lot of time in vineyards. They hear about the challenges around climate change and so on. But what our strategy has done by bringing someone like Dom in, who is not of a wine background, but very much of sustainability background and experience and knowledge, that has helped inform the buyers to actually the sorts of questions to ask and actually to have it in your brief as a buyer when you go out: quality, price, but also sustainability. And that expands to beyond just the environmental element of sustainability. Also the sort of ethical or social element is also a key area that we are exploring.
How many growers do you work with now?
Lots. Yeah, so we work with just short of about 1,000 different wine suppliers.
1,000 suppliers.
And that is...
Dom, I can see that's making you smile as well. I mean, that's a very broad supplier base to have to bring on board with all of this.
It is...
Across a number of cultures.
Yep, you're right.
And...
It's, it is. number one, it's a big number. And I suspect that if you compared that with, say, one of the high street supermarkets, they might work with, I don't even think they'd work with a tenth of that number in terms of wine suppliers. The other challenge, yes, Peter, as you've pointed out, is every wine region, country has different social, cultural elements which come through in how you trade with them. There are different trading styles. So bringing them on board, is a really big challenge. But
if you had an instinct as to which region might be most difficult in this sense, where would you say?
So if you'd asked me about a year ago, I'd have said France.
Okay.
But that's changed, and that's changed because the 2021 vintage was a vintage that Mother Nature threw absolutely everything at French vignerons right across France. And so I think that really woke up the French to climate change really is happening. You know, they had rot, they had frost, they had significant frost at spring, they had rot through late spring, they had rot again late or early autumn, and meant that it was one of the smallest vintages in terms of yield. So that has a direct implication on revenue.
And of course, this year we've had the wildfires near Bordeaux, which have been unprecedented.
Absolutely,
and impacted them hugely.
So I think it would have been France, but the French now are really on board. And actually, as we investigate a bit more deeply in France, one of the great things France is doing is looking at sustainability through a lens of this holistic lens, as opposed to organic. So organic is important, but it's not the answer to sustainability. And the French are really open to the more holistic element of actually sustainability. Yes, organic can help. You've got to concentrate on your vineyards. You've got to concentrate on soil health, water use, energy use. But it's wider than that. Actually, how do you employ your staff? What sort of conditions do they work in? What sort of prices are you paying if you're a brand that's buying in grapes and so on and so forth? So I think the French are going to surprise us and surprise me. I think they're going to turn it around really quickly. That's really interesting.
And you mentioned organic wine there. We've talked about costs quite a bit already. You are going to be investing as a business in this, in being sustainable, and investing in your producers to be sustainable. Can consumers, we people who buy the wine, are we going to expect prices to go up for the wine because of all of this drive to be sustainable?
No, I don't think so, actually. I think for a business like ours, it will be an initial investment, but over time that should pay us as a business back. So no, I think what consumers will get out of it over the long term is just even better quality wine. I think that is, our customers, our members, absolutely, what makes them smile with wine is buying a bottle of wine that has personality, a sense of place. And actually, in order to continue that and even to express that even more vividly, looking after the climate, looking after your vineyard, will mean that your vines are more resilient, and we'll have, what we want to have is a wine society that exists in another 150 years. We're about to celebrate 150 years in 2024, and that's what we want. And that actually, when I started working with Dom on this a few years ago, when we were developing the strategy, that was the thing that I think the penny dropping moment for me was actually, I won't be around in 150 years, but I really hope the wine society is, and I really hope there are still terroir wines that express a sense of place. They still exist. I think it might change, but there will still be a sense of place.
Change in terms of where that wine is grown, but perhaps
where the wine's grown, how it's grown, what grape varieties are used. Bordeaux has just quite recently approved some varieties from Spain and from Portugal as sort of experimental varieties to be grown in Bordeaux, and that's with a view to global warming and what varieties will be suitable to grow in Bordeaux in 20 or 30 years' time. So it's already happening. This sort of the adjustments, a great traditional wine region like Bordeaux are saying, we need to start thinking about the future. So Touriga Nacional, that might have a future in Bordeaux. So it might be that the style of Bordeaux wine is different in 50 years, but how exciting is that?
Now, you're aiming, as far as I understand, for your own label wines to have a sustainability scorecard by 2024. What will that look like?
So what that will look like is it will give our members a very simple and clear indication of the environmental and social impact of that specific wine. So it will need to be a very simple sort of flag, whether it's a traffic light system of sort of green, amber, red. So that's how I see it working. It then gives our members the choice of, if you're a member that actually is more concerned about sustainability over what particular wine they choose, they might go for the ambers or the greens. In terms of the data that supports that, we don't have the answer yet. That's what we're working on next year, is coming up with the set of criteria that will then inform the overall score. So that's actually a really significant piece of work and a really important piece of work.
I mean, and you're aiming for net zero by 2040. Presumably by that stage, scorecards will be redundant because all of the wines will be scoring a perfect score.
Yeah, I mean, the long-term goal with this is that we get to a point, let's say within the next 10 years, where every wine we sell, or most wine we sell, is what we would consider sustainable, actually, socially and environmentally sustainable. That's where we're trying to get to. So when we talk about a scorecard, when we talk about starting with a sustainable range of wines, we're actually, these are the steps to getting to the point where our members can just go on our website, buy a wine and not have to think about, is this sustainable or isn't this sustainable? They shouldn't have to do any more work than just buying the wines that they want to buy.
So on the own label, the other thing just to mention, whilst we're developing our criteria next year, we are, at the beginning of next year, we are relaunching our own label wines with sort of new labels and so on. And part of that process, we have taken the decision to any wine that's bottled under a closure that isn't screw cap, will have no capsules, because capsules, in our view, they're irrelevant. They have no impact on quality. They have no impact on shelf life. Yes, they can make the bottle look nicer. So our designers have found that a bit of a challenge, because they're looking at our new sort of packaging with bottles without capsules. But we feel, it's excessive. It's unnecessary. And the second thing that we've done is we've used this opportunity to go to all of our own label growers and insist on reducing, where we've got bottles that are heavy bottles, reducing those down to lighter bottles. What's really interesting is that some of the appellations, official appellations in Europe, actually within their rules, they have a specific bottle shape that also has a specific bottle weight. So some of those we can't actually have light bottles. So one great example is Chateau Neuf du Pape, where you have the embossed glass. Pic Paul de Pinet as well.
No,
yeah,
really
and it's not just France. Yeah. In places like Spain, like Rioja, again, less so with bottle weights. But if we were to entertain, say, bulk shipping from Rioja, you can't. You have to have every bottle of Rioja that is sold in the UK or sold anywhere has to be bottled in Rioja.
And that's part of the appellation rules.
Part of the appellation rules.
Do you think that needs to change?
Yes.
You're about to celebrate your 150th anniversary in 2024. Congratulations in advance. How do you envisage the Wine Society being in another 150 years' time? What will have changed, apart from the styles of the wine?
I think the way people drink will have changed. It's already changing. I think tastes constantly evolve. So I think there'll be even more. I mean, we're already in a world where the information available to consumers of any product is so much more transparent than it was 10 years ago. I suspect that in 150 years, you'd press a button, or you'd even just think about whatever it was that you were drinking, and it would tell you all the information around that. I suspect something like glass might not be around anymore in 150 years, hopefully sooner, because we see that as that has a real high proportion of carbon footprint for any wine business. So perhaps the way that wines are sold, the way that wines are served will change. Don, what would you add?
The big step is decarbonisation. That we are growing, making, transporting, packaging our wines in a way that we are not taking more from the world than we are putting back in. I think that has to happen, because that's not how we live at the moment. We use something like 3 or 4 planets worth of resources, and we only have one planet. So for that planet to survive, we have to change that whole system of resource use. I think the other thing that I hope will change and is already starting to change are around the farming practices. It's quite extractive at the moment. It's quite commercial. Again, it's about taking more from the land than we put back in, and I think that has to change in how we farm. And that's not just for wine, that's for all agricultural products. But in 150 years' time, we might be growing wine in a greenhouse in space.
I was going to say, I was waiting for when you were going to announce your next branch on Mars. You haven't done that yet, so I'll stop you there. But, Pierre, Dom, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.
Space wine. Let's hope it doesn't come to that.
Quite. I think this planet's quite nice, isn't it? So it would be good to be able to stay here and enjoy our terrestrial wine, on our own planet, rather than going to Mars with Elon Musk. I know where I'd rather be. But in order to do that, it's quite clear things need to change. And again, the Wine Society is a business that's changing. Pierre did actually say, if there's a business that has the opportunity to invest effort and money into sustainability, it's the Wine Society, because of their membership structure, as we talked about before.
And I suppose it goes back to what CEO Steve Finland said at the start of this show. Wine is changing. The world is changing. And so they need to change too.
Yeah. Pierre said that, interesting, their goals or sort of key parameters when it comes to buying wine or listing a wine have always been quality and value. But now that's evolved to include sustainability. So that's in the mix.
So it's new thing.
Not just environmental, but also social and economic sustainability. I suppose it's always been the background, but now it's much more to the forefront. And,
important.
He said that doesn't conflict at all with their growers, because most of them are small, medium-sized, often family-run, so naturally kind of geared towards ensuring survival for future generations anyway.
Yeah, so insetting is an interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Basically using vineyards as a way to sequester carbon and help tackle biodiversity loss, rather than just offsetting by as we mentioned before, planting trees, who knows where.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it makes sense for the wine business to do that. You know, it helps producers, helps reduce the impact of the wider sector. I suppose it's like sweating your assets in a way, in a good way, you know. And
Sweating your assets, liking that. Don't know, sweating at all, really.
Well, yes. You know, and water. Talking about sweating, water is another big issue. I know they're working on too. So you know, it all makes sense, I suppose.
Yeah, and talking of producers, we have tasted a couple of bottles, haven't we, from the Wine Society that tie in with this sustainability theme, and we've got them here now. Of course, we have. And the first one to highlight is the Lubanzi Chenin Blanc 2021 from Swartland in South Africa, and the interesting thing about this one, which we need to tell you because you can't obviously see, is that it comes in a can. It's $3.95 for 250 mils, and it's lovely. It's rounded, succulent, but also refreshing. Lots of waxy apple and peachy flavours, a little bit honeyed, and spot on. Just easygoing and very satisfying.
It is. Now this is a B Corp firm. It's fair trade, carbon neutral. They're a member of 1% for the Planet. They've also partnered with the Pebbles Project, which is a fantastic non-profit focused on South African wine, which I visited not too long ago. You know, this is about as virtuous as wine can get, isn't it? You feel good drinking it.
Very good, very good.
And, you know, cans are obviously much less heavy than bottles to ship. You got that as well. Interesting, from our discussions with the Wine Society, it's clear that they want to sell more and more cans, as well, of course, as bag-in-boxes and maybe PET plastic bottles, but cans are really on their agenda. And they've noticed that South Africa is ahead of the game when it comes to cans. And, you know, so we may well see more from them on this. That's
interesting because we've had a few. When I think back, South African canned wines, and we had a delicious one, didn't we? The one that we included in last year's Wine of the Year show, the Banks Brothers Chardonnay made by Newton Johnson, which was sensational. But yeah, I mean that's interesting. It does. Thinking back, yes, quite a few have come from South Africa. So it does seem to be a bit of a hotspot for that.
Yeah, it does. It really does.
Anyway, moving on though. Our next wine is from New Zealand and is the Dog Point Chardonnay 2019 from Marlborough. Not cheap at $22.50, but I'd still say good value and fabulous wine.
Oh, it's just sensational. You know, we are huge fans of Dog Point, as you listeners may well know.
If you compare that to the cost of, you know, white Burgundy,
exactly.
It's
you know, their
really
Chardonnay
good value.
is that classic toasty, nutty, you know, reductive style with struck match curry leaf notes. It's sort of savoury and complex. It's just really kind of erudite wine. It's sort of fireside wine. You know, maybe a touch less powerful, more elegant in this vintage.
I think slightly, yes. Than we've had
but still
before.
Gorgeous. This is the 2019. 2019. But also, you know, to carry on our theme, they're also very committed to sustainability, aren't they? They're organic, and they put a big emphasis on biodiversity, with lots of land devoted to pasture, ponds, native plantings. You know, they've got chickens and bees.
Have they indeed?
They don't put them in the wine, as far as I know.
Well, either way, it's delicious. And so then our last wine is an unassuming red. I would say unassuming. Yeah. We had an erudite white. I think it's an unassuming red.
Nice.
It's the Tablas Creek Patalan. I think you say Patalan, do you? Patalan de Tablas, 2018 from Paso Robles in California. It's a Rhone blend, as you might expect, of a company co-founded by the Perrin family of Château de Beaucastel. And it includes Syrah, Grenache, Mourvèdre, Counoise and Terret Noir. It's elegant, isn't it? Quite restrained. It's got some red fruit. It's a little bit peppery, meaty. Really, I liked this. It wasn't shouty, but it was just very drinkable and £20.
Unassuming. I think just sort of just gently complex and really interesting. I mean, so Tablas Creek became the United States' first regenerative organic certified vineyard in 2020. They're biodynamic. They've got sheep and alpacas. Now this wine is actually sourced from growers, so it's not part of that estate, so it doesn't sort of form part of that, but they are encouraging their growers to go organic. And they've also interestingly started doing bag-in-boxes, I saw, which is a big step for a quality producer in the US.
Yeah.
So they're doing really good work. They're vocal about sustainability on the US wine scene, and that's great to see.
Well, if sustainability can be this tasty, I am on board. So to recap, ambitious sustainability goals are really important in wine, perhaps even more so than for other sectors. The Wine Society is committing to serious targets, including being carbon neutral by 2024 and net zero by 2040, partly by using vineyards and growers to inset carbon emissions, but also by things like changing packaging, using solar power, switching to electric delivery vehicles. Yeah, I mean, they're showing how it can be done and why wine needs to make this happen to take a lead.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's an intriguing story. No doubt we'll drop back in on at some stage in the near future. Meantime, if you're still thirsty for more content, then do check out our extensive back catalogue, all of which is totally pristine and relevant today. Nothing goes past its sell-by date on Wine Blast, does it?
Of course not. No. Only us.
Evergreen. Yeah, we
well
do.
Past our sell-by dates,
slowly
aren't we?
sinking into our chairs. Now, we mentioned a few shows in this episode, but if not, you could start with us getting messy, trying to find a wine to go with the ultimate umami bomb burger in our last episode. Can we just have a moment's pause? To celebrate that? I mean, have we recovered?
Not really.
Mentally or physically from that yet? From that ultimate burger?
Oh, got to check that one out and try it.
Or you could catch up with our wines of the year. There's lots of fun things to explore.
There are indeed. And if you're feeling charitable, please do leave us a nice rating and review. It costs you nothing, and we very much appreciate it. Our thanks to Dom DeVille, Pierre Mansour, Steve Finlan and the Wine Society. And of course, thanks to you for listening and supporting. Until next time, cheers.